You're listening to the 95Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 95 Podcast. I'm Carolee Culpepper, and I'm here with Dale Sellers, our Executive Director. How are you doing today, Dale?
I'm doing lovely. It's just a great day. I'm excited about what God's doing. There's just a lot of fun things happening. I didn't tell you guys this off mic. I was going to tell you this. I just got off the call. I've been on a 45-minute call with a very influential African-American pastor on the West Coast. And we're looking at ways to help to get 95 Network in to help within his network to help his churches. And I'm just very excited about that. It's
that's incredible.
Dream of mine. I want to work with all cultures, and there's barriers that exist. And so we had a very honest, very frank conversation. And I cannot wait to see the fruit of that conversation. So I'm pumped
excited
up as we do this today. Yeah,
absolutely.
Today,
that's a good morning.
Our guest is Conrad Weaver. Conrad and I think probably have known each other close to 30 years, maybe more than that.
It's been close to that.
Is it that? Is it? Yeah, it's about that like that. And we used to go to the same church together.
Yep, we did.
So I just want to have old former members on our podcast. Now, Conrad has done some great work in ministry. He was our youth pastor at the church I used to attend long time ago.
Okay.
And has done a lot of ministry things since then, and doing some really cool things today as well. And so, first of all, Conrad, welcome. We're glad to have you on today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
And Carolee, he had me on his podcast a few weeks ago. So this is podcast return favor, So but
I gotcha.
He told me some things he's focusing on within his podcast. So I want to dive into that later in our podcast today. But it's just so much fun to see people who are still doing it. Who are still living the life, who are still walking. In fact, the conversation I had with that previous pastor was, he's well older than I am, and I'm going to turn 60 next year. He was like, I just said, the fact that you're still going gives you so much credibility. And that's true for Conrad too, because Conrad and I both have had plenty of opportunities to quit.
Absolutely, we have.
But we'll just do a podcast that we can never air called War Stories.
It might be the number one show, right?
I can assure you that any pastors listening right now would go, hey, I want to be on that one, because we should do an entire podcast of just the worst thing that's ever happened to you in ministry. That'll encourage everybody.
You can open up the phone lines and let people call in.
Let me tell you, back in 1984. Yeah, probably won't go there. But anyway, Conrad, take a few moments and just kind of tell about your story, man. And again, thank you for being here. I'm so happy that you're here.
Well, it's good to be here. Yeah, it's been a long, windy path for me. I grew up in Ohio in a Mennonite family. My father was actually a pastor of a Mennonite church, and so I grew up in that culture. And then I left the Mennonite community, went off to a Baptist college, and I'm not sure what all they thought about that, but I got my undergrad. Undergrad in psychology, and thought I was going to take that trajectory for my life. And then while working at an adolescent program in Greenville, South Carolina, our pastor came to me and said, hey, have you ever thought about coming into youth ministry? And as a matter of fact, my wife and I were actually praying about that, and we made the switch into full-time youth ministry, where I did that for about 7 years, and then moved to Colorado to work for Group Publishing, and was a marketing manager for them. And then got a call from a church in Maryland, where I came back east, and we were on a staff at a church in Maryland for about 6.5 years, where I ended up in discovering my passion and what I'm really good at, and that is telling stories. And through that, I started a video production company. And in 2008, I went full-time in producing video for corporate and for nonprofits. And then in 2010, I produced my first feature-length documentary. And I really found my place in storytelling, is in telling long-form documentaries. And my first film was called The Great American Wheat Harvest. Very different from ministry, but met some just amazing people.
Jesus talked about bread, so.
Absolutely. And I saw lots and lots of wheat growing across the country, traveled from Texas to Montana, following these families across the plains, and told that story. And we're able to just, make some amazing friends. And that kind of led me down the path of producing documentary films. And so now I like to say that I tell stories that matter. And I don't just tell any stories, but it's just stories that really get close to my heart. And I take a deep dive into these stories and learn the culture, learn the background, and hopefully tell stories that inspire people and inspire people to live a better life,
Mhm.
and also talk about subjects that are important. Like my second documentary was about the drought in the American West and the struggles that farmers have in battling with cities for the water, and it's a huge problem. And we're going to probably in the future see wars over water, and so that
Water
was an
Wow.
wars.
issue that was water wars.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think that the term, we're not sure who coined it, but a long time ago someone said, whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting. And
Hmm.
and that's still kind of the mantra out
That's the
west
first time
is
anybody's ever said that on our podcast. Way to go, dude.
and so but more recently in 2018 I released a film called Heroin's Grip. It's a story about
Mm.
the opioid crisis, and we
Mm.
took a deep dive here locally and to tell that story of families who have suffered with their children struggling with opioid addiction,
Mhm.
and many, as we know, many people have lost their lives because of that.
Right.
And it gave me a new sense and vision for these folks, that because anybody, you, me, anybody can get caught into addiction,
Sure.
and it's no respecter of persons. And we showed that in our film. And it gave me, I spent 2 years of my life hanging out with people I never thought I'd hang out with,
Mm.
and it changed my whole life. It changed how I think about addiction, how I think about the folks that are in addiction. I don't call them addicts anymore, just because that stigmatizes them. I call them people who
Mhm.
have an addiction problem.
Mm.
And we know that the answer to life and hope and joy is a relationship with Jesus. And in all of my films, no matter what subject I've been diving into, I met people who love Jesus, and it's
Mm.
been just an amazing journey. And currently, the project I'm working on is called PTSD 911, and it really comes out of spending time with law enforcement and fire and EMS services on the opioid film. I was on a ride along one day, and I was with a police officer, and we got called to an overdose scene, and it was a fatal overdose. And I had never seen
Mm.
that before. Um,
Oh man.
Went into the house. There was chaos. Mom was screaming in the living room. Her 32-year-old daughter was laying dead in the bathroom, and it was a shocking experience for me.
Mhm.
And I watched the police officers and the paramedics as they worked the scene, and you could tell this is just another day for them.
Mm.
And so on my way home, I started thinking about how those types of trauma scenes impact first responders, and because I knew what it did for me, I knew the impact that it had on me, and I thought has got to affect first responders. And I uncovered this huge issue of trauma and first responders in fire, police, EMS, and dispatch agencies. Um, and so I decided that that's my next film. And so I've been working on this now for a little over 2 years, um, capturing the stories, building relationships with people, with first responders all across the country. Uh, Suicide rates among first responders are way higher than the norm nationally. I'm talking like 35% uh,
Mm. Oh my
of
goodness.
first responders have had some kind of a suicidal ideation or event, and compared to maybe 5% of the regular population. And they
Mm.
estimate that a first responder, a police officer, or a firefighter will see and experience 180 traumatic scenes in their life, whereas the average citizen maybe two or three.
Goodness
You
gracious.
think of
Wow.
a 30-year career experiencing 180 traumatic scenes. That's about two a month or so. You know,
Mm.
uh, you can't sustain that. You
Right.
can't. And these scenes are scenes that no one should see.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Things
Mm.
that no one should experience. And I've heard stories that are just horrific, and yet we expect our first responders to respond, be professional,
Mhm.
uh, to get up at 2 a.m. to respond to my 911 call,
Mm-hmm.
and we expect them to do the work that they're supposed to do and trained to do, and they do.
Mm-hmm.
Just yesterday we had a huge fire in Baltimore, and 3 Baltimore firefighters lost their lives
Wow.
in a fire. I think 4 went into the building. They got trapped. They were able to rescue 1, and the 3 others perished. And so that's what first responders face. And yet they do it willingly. They
Right.
go toward the danger. They go toward the event. And so that's why it's important for me to tell this story.
Mm.
Okay, I've got a bazillion questions.
I know. I'm sitting here thinking of it a lot too.
Okay. So the first thing I got to ask, how do you get paid? Are you doing this on your own? How do you make a living doing this? Like, I had to ask that question.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's producing documentary films is very challenging. So I come up with an idea, and then I got to figure out how to raise the money to do the story. And so, and so that's part of my job, is to make connections with people and raise money and convince them to write big checks. And that's become more and more, a harder task to do. So, this project is this latest project is really a passion project, and we've raised $33,000, which, is about a third of the budget.
Oh, that should last you for 4 or 5 years, huh?
Yeah, it's about 10% of the budget that we really need.
Yeah.
But it's such an important story that I can't not tell the story.
So when you get a documentary ready, then how do you know someone's going to play it? I guess is my next question.
Yeah. So in the course of producing a film like this, I'll go back to back to Heroin's Grip. So I connected with people in the recovery community all across America. So we had sponsors who helped underwrite that, organizations who were interested in this subject. And so that's kind of how I pay for the initial part. And then for the distribution, we did screenings in local theaters to kind of, do a big event and invite people. We had, I think our opening night, we had maybe 800 people show up.
That's good.
Locally here. And then we started doing screening events around the country. So we booked events all over the country, and then COVID hit and that kind of shut it down.
Yeah.
But now all of my films are on Amazon. So if you go to Amazon and go to their Amazon Video, you can Google my name and you can search my name and you can find all my films there.
I'm going to do that.
And so so I make a little bit of money off of that. It's not, huge, but then I also do some side projects just to help pay the bills. And I'm very fortunate that my wife has a really good job. She's an assistant principal in a local middle school and been an educator for many years. And so her job kind of helps offset the ups and downs in my career. And so, yeah, it's challenging. I'm not getting rich by any stretch, but I'm rich in the relationships that I've been able to build. I'm rich in the stories that I get to learn about and to tell. And that's really what drives me.
I was looking at your website before we got on our call, and I read that you say my responsibility in the world is to leave it a better place than when I arrived. And I just thought that was so powerful, because this is not just your job. It's not just, like you said, like your passion. It's your responsibility. You're taking ownership over this to tell the world the stories that need to be told. And I think that's incredible.
Absolutely. And that has led me to my next venture, which you see back here on the wall behind me. It's called Explore Purpose, which is my new podcast. And so it's a podcast about purpose and meaning. And so for the past 10, 15 years, I've been telling stories that matter. So my goal now is to help you discover purpose and meaning so that you can leave a greater impact on the world. Because when we live our life with purpose, we can have a greater impact.
Sure.
If we don't have a purpose, we also make an impact, maybe a negative impact.
Yeah.
But when we live with purpose, then we can have a greater positive impact on the world. And if I can help my listeners and the people that I'm working with have a greater impact, then we all benefit from that.
But don't you really miss doing ministry?
That's a great question, because the answer is yes. a lot of, at least the final, 8, 9 years of my ministry, full-time ministry, has been involved in production and helping create an atmosphere where people can worship and connect with Jesus. And I'm still involved with my church. We attend a branch of LCBC, which stands for Lives Changed by Christ. It's a big mega church in Pennsylvania. We have about, I think, 18 campuses, I think. And we're in one of the smaller campuses, and I run sound there for that local campus, and I love it. And actually, my wife Jody, she runs lights, so we're partners on the production team. And
I got to ask you, do you have a funny story you can share about Dale?
Oh man.
No, because I was always so serious.
Yeah, he was always.
I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I could probably dig one up, but I have to say this. It was really, and I'm not saying this to, give Dale a bloated sense of ego, but it was because of Dale's ministry that my wife and I first got into ministry full time.
That's awesome.
We were a young married couple, and Dale had this Bible study that he was leading, and we started attending this Bible study, and we had to memorize these verses that were on little cards, and there was dozens and dozens of cards, and we would just flip through them. And then he had this harebrained idea of taking a bunch of people down to Trinidad, and my wife and I signed up, and we went to Trinidad for a missions trip, and that was the door that opened for us to go into full-time ministry, because we came back from that trip saying, God, we will do anything. We will go anywhere. We will do anything you want us to do. And he called us to youth ministry at the church there, which was, I knew nothing about youth ministry. It was just like, I knew teenagers because I was working with teenagers at a hospital, troubled teenagers. So that was good, I guess. But I knew nothing about leading. I was so young and dumb, and just stumbled
perfect
through,
candidate to be a youth pastor.
Just stumbled through 7 years of ministry there, and I think maybe we left a little impact on a few people, and I hope we did anyway. And
now, was it during that time where you kind of discovered that you were good at telling stories? How did that kind of
No, it was actually later. It was
come about?
It was after we had left and went to Colorado, and I worked in publishing for a couple of years, and then were invited to a church here in Maryland. And it was there that we started a video ministry at this church. And
okay.
I started, but I grew up with a camera in my hand. I always had a camera in my hand, shooting photos. I mean, if you look at our early family pictures, there's my wife and my 2 kids, because I'm the guy behind the camera.
Okay.
I'm not, but that was back before selfies were a thing. And so, I was always behind the camera. I'm that old. Yeah,
I am. Old before he's pre-selfie.
I'm pre-selfie, which is, ancient according to my kids.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it was there that we started doing interviews with people to tell their story, their faith journey.
Gotcha.
And that's really where I kind of discovered that, hey, I really like this. It's meaningful. Then I got into some corporate gigs. Actually, my first paid job outside the church. So I had a guy in our church that worked for this security company, and his company got a contract to do security at the 2005 presidential inauguration in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
So we lived just an hour out of Washington. And so he called me. He was like, hey, Conrad, would you want to go to the inauguration and shoot a little behind the scenes video of our company as we provide security with the Secret Service? I'm like, of course.
Why would anybody want to do that?
I know. Yeah.
Yes, I mean.
And I would have done it for free, but they paid me.
Yeah.
And so I had an all access pass to the inauguration, to the parade route, the presidential balls. It was when George Bush Jr. I guess W had his second inauguration. So I was in the room with him when he and his wife came out to dance on the stage, and I filmed that. And it was just a wonderful experience. And then I was like, hey, I could make some money on the side doing some of these projects. So that's what launched my company.
That
was
cool.
in 2005.
What a great story.
And then in 2008, I had 2 full-time jobs, and after a lot of prayer and sleepless nights, and I struggled with leaving ministry.
Mm.
I struggled with that change of going from working at a church day to day, operations to, am I leaving my calling?
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Because I'm trying to make more money and trying to build a business, and it was
Take
a
care of your
struggle for a number
family.
of years. Yeah, it was a struggle for a number of years.
Well, that's why I asked you that question earlier. I said it kind of tongue in cheek because you do have a ministry.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What you're doing
Mhm.
now is a powerful ministry, and you're
Yeah,
talking about
agreed.
very important things. It's just
Mhm.
not in the context of working in a local church. And
Mhm.
one of the things we're trying to help pastors understand is, again, I'm the old guy here. When I was a teenager and you felt called into ministry, there was only one avenue to pursue, and that was pastoring.
Mhm.
But the reality is not everyone who's called to ministry is called to be a pastor of a local church. So
Mhm.
I did that, but it was not my sweet spot. I did the things that were necessary, but it wasn't what I was passionate about. And what I'm
Mhm.
hoping our listeners understand, sometimes what God has called you into ministry, but it may look different than the way we
Mhm.
define it. And the stuff that you're doing, the stuff that you're seeing, you are in ministry.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I totally agree with you. And what's been really cool, especially with this new project, it's called PTSD 911. Everywhere I go around the country, I was in California, in San Diego a couple months ago, and I was talking to a firefighter. He's like a leader in San Diego Fire, and we were just talking, and you could just tell there's a connection we had. We had this spiritual connection, and then the door opened, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm a believer too." And it was just this really cool experience. And I take this job as a pretty big responsibility. I've gotten to interview major congressmen, members of Congress, senators, congressmen. I interviewed Mike Pence one time before he was, vice president. And so I've gotten a privilege to meet all these leaders in our country. And I take that role very seriously
Mhm.
because I represent not only my business and my film I'm working on, but I represent Christ.
Mhm.
And I can be a representative of Christ to these people. It may be the only time that person has a relation, has met someone that has a relationship with Christ.
Mhm.
I was invited to do I was hired to do a shoot on Capitol Hill one time, and I won't say the organization, but
That
it was
sounds
a
weird. I was hired to do a shoot on Capitol Hill. You're talking about video.
video. Yes, let me clarify. And it was with a very renowned senator that everyone would know her name, and very opposite of my political leanings. But I was in the room with her and with this organization, very far left organization. I was going to take their money. They paid me, and I didn't have any problem with that. But I was the light in the room, I felt. It was
Mm.
an opportunity for me to be there and to help them even understand, because they were like, people of the other party? That's what they
Mm.
said. That you actually know these people? I'm like, yeah, I make friends on both sides.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's what we're called to do.
Yes.
Mhm.
We're called to love our enemies. And I didn't say that, but I didn't didn't want to make them an enemy. But in my mind, that's what I'm called to do. And so
Yes.
I've made friends with very liberal Democrats. I've made friends with very conservative Republicans, and every place in between.
In between.
So
Isn't that
yeah,
what it's like being a Christian? Aren't we supposed to be able to put him first?
you
But
would
anyway,
think,
I don't
right?
want to dive into that whole arena. The main reason I want to have you on today was for you to spend some time talking to us about the whole issues of trauma.
Mm,
I was, I don't know if you listened to or not heard, but I had a traumatic event happen this past summer where I almost drowned for the second time,
mhm,
and it broke me. And I ended up in counseling, and I did not know till this past summer. Our friend Carl Vaders did a podcast with us about it. I didn't know about trauma.
mhm,
I didn't know anything about it. I mean, but I learned from my counselor that trauma is like if you and I are out, and we're working together, and let's say we're trimming or cutting a tree up for firewood. If I cut my arm off with the chainsaw, I don't go, oh man, I cut my arm off, and then just keep on going. You got to deal
mhm,
with it,
mhm,
immediately. You got to jump right on it. We don't view trauma that way, and so
mhm,
a lot of our ministry leaders have layers and layers and layers of trauma. And it's the purpose of today's podcast isn't to compare our trauma with somebody else's trauma. So you've got the worst trauma. It's trauma. And
Right.
if you don't intentionally work on dealing with it, it just loops around in your brain till you die. And so I want to just kind of talk through some of those things that you're seeing. I guess the first thing I want to ask you is, when it comes to dealing with this topic, are people receptive, that the people you're interviewing, are they receptive to even talk about it?
You know, that in years past, so I'm working with the first responder community. So I'm working with firefighters, police officers, police dispatchers. They actually have some of the more severe traumas that you've seen
Because of the calls?
because of the calls.
Mhm.
They hear it, but they don't see it, so they imagine it in their mind,
Mm.
and then they don't have closure.
Mhm.
And I'm working with paramedics as well. And so over the years in the first responder community, the response to trauma was suck it up, buttercup. You know, if you
Just like
can't
pastors.
handle it, get out.
Mm.
And had one old timer told me, man, back in my day, it was suck it up. Here's a beer. And that's how they dealt with trauma.
Mhm.
Mm.
And so consequently, alcoholism especially in the fire community is rampant. It's huge. And so if I'd have done this project 10 years ago, probably nobody would talk to me
Mhm.
because it's just not a thing anybody talks about.
Mhm.
Today, it's much more prevalent. It's the number one topic when you go to big conventions for first responders. It's the number one topic. Trauma is the number one issue because they recognize that trauma has impacted everyone in the first responder community.
Mhm.
I have not met a firefighter, I've not met a police officer, and I've met hundreds of them who have not been directly impacted by trauma
Mhm.
and have suffered some of the things that trauma does to a person's brain. And trauma does impact the brain. In fact, I'm reading a book right now, and if you are interested in seeing what it does to the brain, this book by Daniel Amen, it's called The End of Mental Illness. He is a psychiatrist out of California that studies the brain visually, and he can scan the brain, and he can tell what kind of things you have been involved in by looking at your brain.
Wow.
And
Wow.
it's such an amazing thing. And then he has a whole program to help heal the brain. Trauma, PTSD specifically, can be healed. You can totally heal PTSD, and I've met with people who have been healed from that. There's one modality that there's a bunch of different things that people can do to get to a better place of trauma. But so before I go into the modalities of healing, I'll talk a little bit about what trauma does and how it impacts. So when you have a traumatic event, and I'm saying this as a civilian, I mean, I have a degree in psychology, but that was years ago, so I'm not counting that. This is what I've learned over the past 2 years in working with psychiatrists and psychologists and doctors and first responders all across the country. When you go to a call and you're called to an accident scene, let's say, and you're a paramedic and you get there and the car's all mangled, and in the back seat you see a child seat, and probably there's a kid in there.
Mhm.
You have a 2-year-old at home, and now you're cutting a 2-year-old out of the back seat of a car, and that 2-year-old does not live. That firefighter, that paramedic will take that home with them, and they will wake up in the middle of the night screaming. And if they don't have immediate help. And so we've seen, and so now the next day they go to another call and they have something else that happens. Maybe it's not quite that serious. And then the next day. And so we have what we call cumulative trauma. So you have one event after another event. It just stacks on top. And if you don't get help for those, then pretty soon you're at a place where you can't sleep anymore. And we know that sleep is one of the biggest impacts for trauma. So it's a cycle that now you wake up in the night, you can't sleep. So now you're not getting sleep. So now you're going to work sleep deprived. And now when the next thing hits, it impacts you more.
Mhm.
And it's just a vicious cycle. And with many of our first responders, especially now with COVID and all the stuff that's going on with COVID and the reduced staffing, and now they're working longer shifts. And there's actually a fire agency that I heard about in South Carolina that they normally work 24 on and 48 off. They switched it to 48 on and 24 off because of short staffing. So now you have people sleep deprived going to calls, and those traumas continue to accumulate in their brain. And so what do? They start drinking, or they start taking sleeping pills. They start self-medicating, or they go to other addictive behaviors. Pornography is huge. They go into gambling and other things that will impact
anything to numb the pain.
Anything to numb the pain.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be an affair, it could be whatever it is. And so these things, so now you have that stress on top of it because they know their behavior is bad, but they're using that as a way to numb the pain. And so it's this cumulative thing that just keeps growing and growing. And pretty soon they find themselves, and I've talked to many, many people who found themselves sitting, police officer, a sergeant in Orlando, sitting in his patrol car. He drove out to a construction site where nobody was around, stuck a gun under his chin, and was sitting there. And if one of his officers on duty had not shown up, he would not be here today. And that happens so often. And suicide rates among first responders is sky high. And leadership in the first responder communities, there are some leaders, many leaders now, who are acknowledging this and are looking for answers and solutions. There are others who are still old school and still have that suck it up mentality.
Yeah.
And so I had a police officer, he's a good friend of mine now. He's also a believer. He has an agency out in California, actually a police chief. He said, "We do not have a wellness program in our agency. We have a wellness culture."
Oh, wow.
Everything we do in our agency is about wellness, because I know if my officers are not well, they're not going to respond well, and that's going to end up on the evening news. And so he's doing everything he can to help his officers, from the front desk clerk to the lady in the evidence room to the officer on the street. They're working to make it better for them.
How does that look like? How does that look practically, as far as, money? I'm sure there's not a whole lot of money in the budget to be,
right,
paying for a lot of things like this. How are people getting around that, and how are they able to offer, helpful tools and solutions?
So his solution was, this is Chief Neil Gang from Pinole, California. He believed in the wellness culture in so much that he went to city council, who holds the purse strings for his agency. And he says, "I need a line item budget. I need a line in our budget that's for wellness."
Okay. Wow.
And he convinced them to do it, and they did it. And so now he funds that through, but many, many agencies don't have that. And so most first responder groups, they have unions that help, pay for some of these things. They all have insurance that helps cover. But the bigger issue is getting leaders to say yes to someone who's saying, "I need help." Oftentimes people won't say, "I need help," because if you need help, that means you're not stable. We're going to take your gun and your badge from you. You're going to get a desk job. Nobody wants that.
They wait too late a lot of times to get help. So what are some of the next steps that you see that are aware of that are to help deal with trauma?
I think first of all, it's got to start with the leaders. It's got to start with leaders to get training to deal with this. There's lots of organizations that offer training. I was just at a first responder conference recently. It's called First Responder conferences, and they do them all over the country. And it's a 2-day intensive where you get training on how to set up a wellness program, how to set up a wellness culture in your agency. But the other first thing is to start with peer support. It's to have peers, because you cannot have say a police officer. You cannot have a police officer who has to report to a sergeant, to report to someone higher up. They're not going to tell their sergeant they're having problems.
Mm-mm.
They're going to talk to someone. They're going to talk to a peer.
Okay.
And so, but you need trained people, trained peers that know how to. If Dale, you come up to me and say, "Hey, I'm having these thoughts about hurting myself." Well, I need to know how to handle that.
Mm-hmm.
And so any peer support program needs to have trained peer support members to know how to deal with those kind of situations. And it needs to be anonymous. It needs to have an anonymity. That way it doesn't go up to chain of command to the higher ups. They don't need to know unless it's a serious issue that's impacting, work in a serious way.
Mm-hmm.
But there are so many organizations that are offering this training and are offering help to provide resources for first responders. I'm really excited. Next week, this will be the first week of February, I'll be in Nashville, Tennessee. The National Fraternal Order of Police, the big police union, it's their third year, I think, is their wellness summit. And so I'll be presenting there. I've been invited to speak there and share a little bit about my film. But they realized that this is such a problem that they actually hired a coordinator for their wellness program. So now they have a wellness kind of a czar for the national FOP. And so this is their number one priority, is
That's
officer
great.
wellness around the country. And I'm seeing that also in the fire service. I'm seeing that in the dispatch agencies as well, that these things are a priority. So there are solutions.
Are you starting to see some change?
I am.
Some
Yeah,
growth in
it's very
positive
slow.
direction?
It's very slow. But just from the 2 years I've been working on this, I've already seen a change and shift in the culture of how to respond to these things and making it a priority in our first responders. Because my goal with my film, I have 3 goals. One is to raise awareness, because the general public doesn't know what first responders do and what they face.
Mhm.
The second goal is to break the stigma of asking for help.
Mm.
I'm not asking for help because I might lose my job, or I might get put on desk duty, or because the guys might laugh at me, which
Mhm.
all those have been true.
Sure.
Mhm.
The third thing we want to do with our film is to inspire change in agencies. And that's the hardest thing,
Mm.
is to inspire change, especially those agencies that still have old timers. My police chief friend in California, he spoke at a conference in San Diego that I was at, and he said, to a room of about 700 people and first responder, he said, "Look, if you're one of these leaders who think this is all a bunch of hooey, and you think that wellness doesn't matter, just retire and get out of the way."
Mm.
And the whole room applauded.
Oh,
It was so
wow.
cool. It was one of those statements that he didn't care who heard it, because it needed to be said. If
Mhm.
you're one of these old schools that say suck it up, just get out of the way,
Mm.
because you're hurting your people. And I think it's the same with even church leaders.
Yeah, that's kind of the next obvious segue I wanted to go to as we move toward the end of the podcast, kind of dive into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you are a leader, and first of all, there's many church leaders who have caused trauma. I've been the recipient of that, and I think
I've
we
never
can all probably
experienced
say
that personally.
But
I'm teasing.
and I think we need to recognize that there are situations that, as church leaders, perhaps, and I've probably been guilty of this, causing trauma in someone else. And I look back at my years, and I look back at those years as a learning experience and something that I can learn from now.
Mhm.
But I think we've all been the recipients of trauma, and I think we need to recognize that, and to be able to recognize the trauma in our own lives and get help. There's no shame in seeing a counselor.
Absolutely.
I think it's one of the best. So I've been working on my mindset for the past 3 years, and just changing my mindset and changing some of those things that have been limiting beliefs in my mind that I've had for many, many years. And I think sometimes we want to over spiritualize things, especially in the church world. But I think, Romans 12:1 says we are transformed by the renewing of our mind.
Mm.
And I think that's something that psychologists today, and there's many thought leaders in the self-help gurus, as we call them, that have been talking about this for years. It's a biblical principle.
Mm.
You change your life by changing your mind.
Mm.
So we've got strategic partners, Bob Hamp, and then recently we met with Marty Sawyers from the Full Strength Network, and they all help focus on that. I used to tell people this: when people get married, there used to be this concept that I remember now, and again, maybe I'm the only one who thought this, but I don't think it was true. You have problems in your life when you're, of, but when you're dating, you hide all that stuff. And so when you're dating, you look your best, you put on your best front, you go to the nice places, you're always sweet, that kind of stuff. And then you marry somebody, and a week later, they're like, who are you? And so there's this concept that when you get married, all your baggage goes away. And what I began to help people understand was, when the guy marries the girl, he's got baggage and she's got baggage. And when they get married, it's just more baggage.
This is more baggage.
And so you just bring more baggage into it. And so for those who are in ministry, you probably have some baggage from even before your ministry years that you brought into it. Some of it's just growing up. I mean, that's what I discovered about myself was, basically my counselor helped me to understand was that I always put everybody else first. I at my own detriment, I won't take care of myself to go save someone else. And he's just basically like, Dale, if you keep doing this, you're not gonna be around longer. You got to take care of yourself. And so he gave me permission to do that. And for a lot of our pastors, they brought baggage into ministry. And then, as you alluded to, ministry has a way to add to that baggage.
I think that
just go away.
I think that in the first responder community, and I think it's probably even more so in church community, we lie. Well, how are you today? Fine.
Oh, great. That's the Christian response.
That is what we've been telling each other for so many years. A few years ago, I was working on my previous film, Heroin Script. I was invited to attend an AA meeting down in DC, and it was in DuPont Circle. And it was probably the most amazing spiritual experience I've ever had. It was not a Christian-based group. There was people in there there was every kind of demographic, gay, straight, black, white, every kind of demographic you could think of was in this group. And they've been meeting daily for 30 years. This group has.
Wow. And
people come and go, but there's a core that has been meeting for every day for 30 years. So I went in there just as an observer. I felt more love, more acceptance, more compassion than in any church meeting I've ever been at.
Wow.
These people all came acknowledging their brokenness. And that's what sometimes in church ministry we don't acknowledge. We don't acknowledge that we're all broken. And when I meet with first responders now that are dealing with this stuff, they acknowledge their brokenness. And I think when we can be honest and we can open up our, kind of pull the curtains back and say, you know what, I'm messed up. I'm not only a sinner, we like to spiritualize it, so I'm a sinner. No, I have lustful thoughts. I have, a habit that I'm getting. I have these brokenness that I need help with. If we can acknowledge those things, man, the freedom that it gives you. I saw these people talking to each other and supporting each other. And man, you fell off the wagon last week. Guess what? We're going to love you. We're here for you. We're going to support you. We're not going to condemn you because we've all been there. And they acknowledge that. I'm, the one guy, he can say that, okay, I've been there. I've fallen off the wagon. I've gone down that path. And so they all acknowledge their brokenness. And when you have that honesty, what's the scripture say? The truth will set you free. And there's so much freedom in that. And I think that's where the church needs to learn from some of these groups like that.
Mm-hmm.
that to have honest conversations, it brings freedom, and that's when the healing can begin.
That's so true.
Pastors don't usually have anyone they feel that they can trust. I remember most of my years in ministry thinking, who does a pastor tell this stuff to? Well, there are ministries God's raising up, and one I'll double down on it toward the end. But I know Full Strength Network we just connected with. They'll offer free counseling for you, or very not free, but very affordable counseling for you and your family. And so there are people who want to help you. So
that's right.
That's the
I
only way
think
to get
there
free.
again is where, and I've heard the same thing from fire captains and police chiefs. Who do I talk to? And there are networks of these organizations that they can connect with, and others that they can connect with to speak to them, because they, as a police chief, you're not going to go talk to your sergeants or your other command staff about this. You're not going to talk to the guys in the patrol car, because, however, I have heard of police chiefs who do, who have told their people, look, I'm struggling with this myself. And there's a level of honesty there and openness that can be beneficial. I'm the chief, so nothing hurts me.
Yeah.
I think that's sometimes what pastors have done. I'm a pastor, so I'm the good guy
I'm
here.
good.
I've not had any problems, and that's just a bunch of
Hooey.
malarkey.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up today, this is I'm encouraged just to hear that things are starting to change a little bit. I always look for hope in every situation. So that's good, and I'll be praying for you as you continue to do this documentary and your research and your storytelling to get more information out about this. But as we go forward, we always like to end with asking, what is one word of hope or encouragement that you could offer the people listening today?
Well, it's actually a quote that I've been kind of vamping on the last few days. So I'm reading a new book called Hero on a Mission by Donald Miller. And if you haven't heard of Donald, you should.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's a great guy. I'm actually connected to some of his team. I'm hoping to meet some of them next week. But I was reading this book this week, and I got to find the page number. Sorry about that. I think it's page 37. No.
We'll stall live here on the podcast.
Okay, here it is. It says, and this is the thing. It says, I do not want to live life looking for something. I'm sorry, I'm going to start that again. I do not want to live life looking for something I don't have. I want to become more and more interested in the opportunities I've been given. Sometimes we forget what's in our hand. We forget for the opportunities that we've been given. Maybe we've had the opportunity. Maybe we've had trauma in our life. That's an opportunity. We can, if we can work through that trauma, now we can help someone else that has experienced that same thing.
That's so true.
We oftentimes we wish for what we don't have. We wish for the new car or the new whatever, or the bigger, the better, the bigger boat, all those things that are unattainable. And we forget the amazing opportunities we've been given to make an impact. And so what I've learned over the past, the years of my life, these are all learning experiences that I can use to make an impact on the world around me. So look what you have in your hand.
Nothing is wasted, is it?
Right.
It's so good hanging out with you today. I just, as we're kind of wrapping up, I'm kind of seeing you and Jody in my mind in that class 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And to see where you've come and how God's using you. And I do believe that this is a ministry that you have, and that, and it's very impactful. So I really appreciate what you're doing. I pray God uses it to save the lives of a lot of people in this community. And again, pastors, specifically pastors, are people in ministry. If you need help in the area of, first of all, maybe what I'm hoping to do with the podcast is to get you to recognize that you have trauma. And if you want to get help dealing with it, please, and we'll have it in the show notes, but please reach out to the Full Strength Network and Marty Sawyer's. That's why they exist. And they've got counselors in every state.
And it's all anonymous.
It's all anonymous. And because again, I used to, Conrad, I said this all the time. Back in the day when we knew each other, I was like, where does a pastor turn? If a pastor, if a leader in ministry has got a problem, if they've got a porn addiction, if they've got something going on the side, it always ends in disaster because they keep trying to hide it, but they can't get away from it. And you can't live that way. So if you need help, please reach out. But Conrad, thank you for being with us. Thanks for joining us today. This has been really, really informative, and we appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.